This is the ultimate guide to Godzilla, film and TV appearances. Over the course of his long life, Godzilla has appeared in hundreds of movies, TV shows, specials, and even commercials. That's because the character debuted way back in 1954. And since then he has been played by many different actors and portrayed in many different ways. It all started with the classic black and white original that started it all. Then there were many different types of Godzilla films over the years, including those classic era films, the Heisei era films, the Millennium era films, plus the most recent movies starting with Gareth Edwards' Godzilla in 2014 and continuing today with the more. But if you want to see all of the different portrayals of the big guy, then you have to look beyond movies. Because in addition to being in countless Japanese and American films, Godzilla has also been in an anime series, a variety of TV specials, and even video games. In fact, there are so many appearances that we can't list them all here. But some other highlights include the 1970s Godzilla cartoon, Godzilla Island, Godzilla King of the Monsters, the 1998 Godzilla, the 2004 Godzilla, Final Wars, the 2016 anime film Godzilla, City on the Edge of Battle, the 2018 sequel Godzilla, City on the Edge of Battle, Earth, and the upcoming Godzilla -1. The best Godzilla movies of all time. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own personal favorite when it comes to these movies. But in general, there are a few that rise above the rest, and we're going to tell you about them right now. Starting off at No. 10, we have Son of Godzilla. This may come as a surprise to some people, but this movie is great for establishing Minilla, who would go on to become a major player in the Godzilla canon. Next up at number 9 is the Americanization of Godzilla. Sure, this movie has its flaws, but there's something undeniably fun about seeing Godzilla take on the Western world. Next up at No. 8 is Godzilla vs. This movie starts off the Heisei era, and it does so with a bang. Seeing King Ghidorah wreak havoc on the past and Godzilla try to stop him is just one heck of a ride. At No. 7 is another movie that starts off an era, this time the Millennium era. Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. Godzilla against Mechagodzilla is simply a blast from start to finish. These two are such an iconic duo and they do not disappoint here. Godzilla vs. Billante is next. This movie helped make the Heisei era what it was, and it certainly deserves all the praise it gets. You have a great story, amazing visuals, and an epic showdown between Godzilla and Billante. Coming in at No. 5 is Godzilla vs. Destroyer. This movie gave Godzilla a proper send-off for the time being, and the fight between Godzilla and Destroyer is simply unforgettable. At No. 4 is the 2014 Godzilla. This was a really good movie, and it kick-started the Monsterverse and brought us to where we are today. Coming in at No. 3 is Shin Godzilla. This was a very unique take on the character, and it really feels like a horror film at times. The effects are great, and Godzilla looks terrifying. No. 2 is Godzilla v. Then you know why it's so high. It gives us arguably one of the best showdowns in all of the Godzilla films, and it features one of the saddest moments in all of the Godzilla films. And coming in at No. 1 is my personal favorite, Godzilla, King of the Monsters. This is everything a Godzilla movie should be and more. There are so many great moments here. I literally can't list them all. The worst Godzilla movies ever made. As you may have guessed, not every Godzilla movie is a winner. Here are some of the worst. Starting off at number 10 is Godzilla, the Planet Eater. This is honestly one of the worst animated movies I've ever seen, and that includes direct-to-video animated movies. Godzilla vs. Hedorah is next. This movie is honestly pretty dull and boring, and Hedorah doesn't exactly help things. Coming in at No. 8 is Terror of Mech. This one is pretty bad, especially when you compare it to the other Mechagodzilla movies. Next up at No. 7 is Godzilla and Mothra, the Battle for Earth. This movie is just kind of messy, and that's putting it nicely. At No. 6 is Godzilla's Revenge. Now, this one isn't too bad. There are some decent action scenes, but it's ultimately undone by how racist it is. Next up at No. 5 is Godzilla vs. Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. This movie is honestly just boring, and I don't feel like anything else needs to be said. Coming in at No. 4 is Godzilla vs. Megalon. It's pretty boring, and I don't think anything else needs to be said. Next up at No. 3 is Godzilla vs. King Caesar. This movie is pretty bad, and the fight between Godzilla and King Caesar is pretty lame. I honestly don't get why King Caesar is so popular. At Note 2 is Godzilla 1985. This movie is pretty bad. And if you want to hear more about why it sucks, I recommend checking out LRM's review of it. And coming in at No. 1 is easily Godzilla the series. This show just kills any interest you have in the character. It makes me wonder if Toho just wanted to milk the Godzilla franchise for all it was worth after the success of the original Godzilla vs. Kong, a rivalry for the ages. Now, depending on when you first got into the Godzilla franchise, you may or may not be familiar with Kong. For example, I didn't know who he was until I was around 12 years old, and since then, he has gone from being this goofy character who battles a giant ape to being a tragic figure who battles an unstoppable force of nature. Honestly, though, I think their first battle set the tone for their relationship going forward. They're both incredibly powerful beings who aren't afraid to take the fight to the other. And while Godzilla has typically come out on top in these battles, King Kong has proved to be a worthy opponent. Ultimately, I think these two will always have a great rivalry going forward. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, the battle of steel and scales. There have been many villains in the Godzilla franchise over the years, but none have left quite the impression as me. The idea of man taking on Godzilla with technology was a bold one, and it paid off big time. The fights between these two are some of the most epic showdowns in all of cinema, and Mechagodzilla really brings out the best in Godzilla. The fact that Godzilla seems to enjoy fighting this guy is just another thing that makes him such a cool monster. The role of Mothra in the Godzilla universe. Mothra is one of the most well-known kaiju of all time, and while she's a bit different in each iteration, she typically plays the role of guide and motherly figure to the human characters. She's a beautiful and graceful creature who is also incredibly powerful, and while she's typically aligned with Godzilla, she's not afraid to stand up to him if she feels it's necessary. King Ghidorah, Godzilla's greatest enemy. When you think of Godzilla's rogues gallery, one monster immediately comes to mind. King Ghidorah. This three-headed terror is one of the most recognizable movie monsters of all time, and his showdowns with Godzilla are some of the most epic battles in all of cinema. King Ghidorah is truly one of the most iconic villains in all of fiction, the most underrated Godzilla movies. As I mentioned earlier, Godzilla has appeared in a ton of movies over the years, and while some of them are incredibly popular, others haven't gotten the love they deserve. Some of the most underrated Godzilla movies include Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, Godzilla Mothra and King Ghidorah, Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, Godzilla, Tokyo SOS, Godzilla, Final Wars, and Godzilla, King of the Monsters. All of these films have something unique to offer, and they're definitely worth checking out. The animated adventures of Godzilla. Godzilla has been featured in a lot of cartoons over the years. The first one that I ever saw was the 1970s incarnation, and while it was a bit dated, I still enjoyed it. Since then, there have been many different takes on the character, including the 2003 Godzilla, the Planet of the Apes, and the 2019 Godzilla, King of the Monsters, which was honestly pretty good. Godzilla's appearances outside of Toho films. As I mentioned before, Godzilla has appeared in a ton of movies over the years, including outside of Toho films. For example, he made a cameo appearance in the 1998 Godzilla film. He's been referenced in various anime series, including One Punch Man, and he even made an appearance in the Adam Sandler comedy 100-Year-Old Man. There are so many of these cameos and references that we couldn't possibly list them all here, so I encourage you to do your own research. The evolution of Godzilla's roar. Godzilla's roar is one of the most iconic movie monster sounds of all time, and it's been a long time since the original 1954 film. Over the years, sound designers have created different versions of the roar, including one that sounds like a jet engine and one that sounds like a T-Rex. My personal favorite is the roar from the 2014 film, which was designed by sound designer and composer Alexander Dis. It's a deep, powerful roar that really makes you feel like Godzilla is a force of nature. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you'd like to subscribe, we would love to have you join our community. Until next time, stay safe, stay awesome, and stay nerdy.